This season, the Pistons have been one of the most surprising teams in the NBA. Just last year, they were the worst team, and now they're the 6th seed and have just won 9 straight games, something they haven't done in almost 2 decades. But it feels like just yesterday, they had one of the darkest futures in the NBA. Blake Griffin was constantly getting injured and was making $40 million a year. His value was so low at one point, the Pistons had to buy him out, getting nothing in return and still owing him $60 million. And to make matters even worse, 1 year prior to buying out Blake, they would trade their franchise center Andre Drummond for a crusty pair of socks and 1 second-round pick. So how exactly did the Pistons pull off one of the craziest rebuilds? In the 2020 offseason, the Pistons would hire a new GM and he would revamp their entire roster. Only 4 players were still on the team from last year. Many analysts loved what the Pistons did. They would trade away guys like Bruce Brown, Luke Kennard, and Christian Wood, and in return got a couple of picks. They would use those picks to draft Isaiah Stewart and Saddiq Bey, and would draft Killian Hayes with their own pick. In free agency, they would sign Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee, 2 moves analysts didn't like. They said overpaying for a role player and a 30-year-old big man was a mistake. That season, the Pistons were really bad. On the bright side, most of the rookies played really well. Isaiah Stewart brought a lot of energy, hustle, and defense and was named to all-rookie second team. Saddiq Bey was one of the best 3-point shooters and would break the Pistons rookie record with 175 made threes. Another bright spot was Jeremy Grant. He would have a breakout season and would finish in 2nd place in the MIP voting. As for Killian Hayes, he was super disappointing. He struggled to score the ball and his shooting splits were god-awful. During the season, the Pistons didn't make a lot of trades. The only big one was trading Derrick Rose to New York for Dennis Smith Jr. and a 2nd-round pick. After an awful season losing 52 games, all those losses would end up paying off in a big way. The basketball gods would bless the Pistons with the 1st overall pick, and this year's draft had a generational prospect in Cade Cunningham. As for the rest of the Pistons offseason, they didn't do much. They would trade Mason Plumlee for a 2nd-round pick, then they would draft Isaiah Livers in the 2nd round and would sign Kelly Olynyk and Trey Lyles. Throughout the regular season, the Pistons continued to be one of the worst teams in the NBA. Troy Weavers would also make a couple of head-scratching moves. One of those moves was trading for Marvin Bagley. Bagley was a big disappointment in the NBA. He was the 2nd overall pick and the Kings were giving up on him because he wasn't developing into a decent role player. Troy Weavers sort of had a bad obsession with trading for overhyped lottery picks who were struggling in the NBA, and usually these trades would just end up wasting assets and roster spots. As for Cade Cunningham, he would struggle to start off his rookie year but would quickly turn things around and would end up finishing in 3rd place in the Rookie of the Year vote. Both Saddiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart took small jumps, and Killian Hayes, well, he was still bad. Next year, the Pistons would have a very busy offseason. The first move they made was trading Jeremy Grant to the Blazers for a 2025 Bucks 1st round pick. This was a very disappointing trade because Jeremy Grant's trade value was at an all-time low, and over the past couple of years, they turned down multiple offers that brought back better assets. Right after that trade, they would flip that pick to the Knicks and get back the 13th pick in the draft, and they would end up taking Jalen Duren, a 7-footer with crazy balance and a knack for altering shots. They would also draft Jaden Ivey, a perfect combo guard to pair alongside Cade Cunningham. Some other offseason additions was trading for Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks and signing Kevin Knox. Unfortunately for the Pistons, Cade would go down with a season-ending surgery, causing him to miss most of his sophomore season. With Cade being injured, the Pistons would be fighting for lottery odds once again. As for the rest of the team, they really struggled without Cade, and Troy Weavers would have an awful trade deadline. He would trade Saddiq Bey and Kevin Knox, and in return got James Wiseman. They were giving up on Saddiq Bey after 1 bad year, and were getting back a bust who had one of the worst plus minuses in NBA history. On top of all of that, the Pistons already had a logjam of centers on their team, and adding James Wiseman was just gonna make the problem worse. The only good thing that happened that year was both Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren showed a lot of flashes and had solid rookie years. During the offseason, they would draft Ashur Thompson and Marcus Sasser. Then they would trade for Joe Harris and Monte Morris, 2 veterans who were supposed to mentor this young locker room and be key pieces to this team. They would also bring back Isaiah Stewart, and the big offseason move was firing Dwayne Casey and hiring Monty Williams. Now at the time, analysts loved this hiring by the Pistons. Monty Williams really helped transform the Suns Suns into a finals team, and despite having a couple of down years, was still viewed as one of the best head coaches in the market. However, there was one red flag people were ignoring. Monty made it very clear he was done with coaching and had no desire to coach the Pistons. The only reason why he took the job was because they offered him a bag he couldn't resist. With Cade coming back from injury and the Pistons adding a couple of good role players, fans were hoping to make the play-in. Unfortunately, that didn't happen and things would take a turn for the worse. First, it was 1 loss, then it was 2, which quickly became 5, and then out of nowhere, Pistons had 28 straight losses. It got so bad, fans were wearing paper bags on their head to the game. Even Cade couldn't believe how bad the Pistons were. He would say, "We're not 2-26 bad, you know what I mean? No way we're that bad." A lot of the blame was being put on Cade. People were calling him a bust and said he couldn't be the #1 option on a playoff team. Those people failed to acknowledge Cade wasn't the problem. The problem was Troy Weavers and Monty Williams. Troy Weavers did an awful job building around Cade, and Monty's coaching was terrible. He was starting Killing Hayes, who clearly shouldn't have been in the NBA, and on top of that, he was a horrible fit next to Cade. Monty also kept running a double big lineup, which was one of the worst lineups in the entire league. At the trade deadline, there wasn't much the Pistons could do to salvage the season, so they made a couple of smaller deals. Going into the offseason, the Pistons would make big changes to their front office. They would fire Troy Weavers and Monty and would hire a new GM. With the Pistons having $60 million in cap space, they would bring in veterans like Tobias Harris, Malik Beasley, and trade for Tim Hardaway Jr. Going into next season, the team still had some low expectations and at best were seen as a play-in team. Well, the Pistons have shocked the world, and so far this season, they've been amazing. Guys like Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr. have added a veteran voice to this locker room, and Beasley has been one of the best shooters in the NBA, shooting 44% from 3, and he's hit some pretty big time shots in the clutch. Despite Beasley playing amazing, he hasn't been their best offseason addition. That title goes to JB Bickerstaff. JB has really empowered the young guys and has helped Cade Cunningham turn into a superstar. A couple of other young guys he has helped is Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren. Isaiah Stewart has been the defensive anchor for this team, and Jalen Duren has been a great rebounder and a great finisher at the rim. Jaden Ivey was also having his best season before he got hurt. The two guys who need more love is Ron Holland and Asar Thompson. Ron Holland, despite struggling on the offensive end, has been a defensive menace, and Asar Thompson has taken a massive jump from his sophomore year. After being unplayable at times, he has really learned how to be an offensive threat without shooting the ball, and he still has that amazing D. JB Bickerstaff has really brought a defensive identity to this team, and they've been top 10 in defense, but despite looking amazing, what is the ceiling of this team? Well, if the playoffs started today, they would go against the Knicks, and I think they have a good chance at beating them. I think Asar Thompson would make life very difficult for Brunson, so I would not be surprised if they made it to the second round. Speaking of Asar, his brother Amen is doing his thing in Houston, and they're another team who had many ups and downs in their rebuild. If you want to hear more about their rebuild, click right here.